Hi everyone, I'm the Le Sueur River. This is a Draw My Life. It's starting at 1650, when the two Indian tribes, the Dakota and the Ojibwe, were the only people on my banks. Then in the 1700s, the first ever European settlement to occur ever was made. It was actually on the intersection of the Le Sueur River and the Blackfoot River, right there. Next, in 1862, there was a massive flood. It destroyed a ton of rivers, all of them except one. Then, in 1881, there was another massive flood, the largest one ever on record. Then in 1899, thankfully, there was the first ever law to decrease pollution, the Rivers and Harbors Act. It made it so that there was no dumping of liquid waste, minus the sewage system from river to river. Then, the Red Jacket Bridge was built in 1911. It's still here. It's not ruined by flooding. 1912 to 1923 was a fun time. I had clams. People were taking advantage of my clams, though, making buttons and cement out of their shells. In the 1930s, a big surprise happened. I had a drought. It was really surprising due to the massive amounts of flooding. Then, after World War II in the 1950s, there was a huge increase in demand for food, which meant along my banks there was more demand for agriculture and farming, which led to lots of drainage into the river. In the 1970s, there was a ton of pollution. It led to a lot of very unhealthy fish, and there were warnings against fishing and eating the fish. It was also caused by an increase in sediment. In the current day, there's a bunch of conservation work, and actions are being taken to clear the pollution. Now, animals on the Le Sueur River, there used to be a ton of clams. They were filter feeders. They were really sensitive to pollution, and they cleaned up the water. But because of that pollution, I don't have any anymore. Also, now in the present day, I've got very little life. Two fish species are really prevalent, the spot fin shiner and the sand shiner. They're both very hardy and can withstand high amounts of pollution, so they're the two main fish species that live in me. Then there's the big sad thing that not many animals can survive because of my high pollution levels. One thing I'm lacking out on is caddisflies, which I've heard are really cool. When it comes to people and their role around me, there's no fishing or swimming that's allowed, and my water definitely isn't drinkable. There's a lot of flooding, though. My banks have been getting higher and farther out due to the massive amounts of erosion. And the sediment around me is getting really polluted from farming, and it's seeping into my banks and my body. As Carrie Jennings says, it is the beating muddy heart of the Minnesota River Basin, and represents in this extreme all the problems we are seeing basin-wide. No fishable, swimmable, and certainly not drinkable waters anywhere to be seen. That is simply unacceptable. Along with that, there's a lot of talk about my flooding. It causes damage to roads and it floods the houses that are near my banks. It's a big problem. Also, I have a high sediment input into the Minnesota River due to my large amounts of sediment just in me in general, but it inputs itself into the Minnesota River. There's also a lot of recreation. The only thing really that's notable is canoeing, because fishing and swimming are not allowed. It's a real shame. Also, when it comes to agriculture, there's a ton on my banks. Specifically corn and soybean. There's a lot of it, and it causes a lot of pollution. And the land here is hard to manage because it's so wet and muddy. Also, there's a huge lack of funds. When it comes to something good, there's the Federal Farm Bill. And that's the end. I hope you enjoyed learning about me. I would like to say that I have a ton of strengths, but Mostly with my pollution, it's getting to be pretty weak, it seems. Hopefully, I can make a good recovery.